Okay, thank you and welcome back. I want to welcome those of you who are watching on Zoom. We continue to appreciate your participation. Before we begin our next session, I just want to again give a shout out to all of the groups and individuals who have supported Carolina Public Humanities over the last year. And we look forward to your continuing support and engagement in the coming year. So thank you to all of you, including those who are on our advisory committee. So now I would like to introduce our speaker for this second session of today's seminar. Laura Villa Torres completed her BS degree at the Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana in Mexico City. Excuse my Spanish, but I'm giving it my best shot. She came to UNC for graduate work at the Gillings School of Global Public Health, and she received both her master's in public health and her PhD here at UNC's program at the School of Public Health. She then joined the Center for the Health Equity Research Team in the School of Medicine in 2018 and participated in an ongoing study of health-related practices of migrant communities in both the U.S. and in Mexico. So she goes back to Mexico as well. She's now an assistant professor in the UNC Gillings School of Public Health, where her research focuses especially on the health disparities in immigrant communities, with particular attention to the challenges that people face when they are living with limited documentation status. She's active in reaching out to migration communities far beyond the university, and she connects her academic research to the real-world challenges of people who live in vulnerable situations as laborers and migrants. So please welcome Laura Villa Torres for her presentation, which is called Public Health and Latinx Migrant Communities in the United States. Laura.
Thank you.
You have your microphone on?
Yeah, I do. I do.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's your water. Thank you so much. I don't speak as slow as Anna, so please, I think the sign for when you're translated to slow down is like this, so just do it to me when I'm starting to speed up. And thanks again for inviting me. I mean, I'm trained in sociology back in Mexico, and then my master and PhD is in public health and health behavior. So I don't come from the humanities, but I feel like I'm a frustrated historian. I have shared this with Lloyd and with Anna, because a lot of the work I do, or I'm currently doing, is conducting oral histories. And I've done a lot of we call it qualitative research, through the, past 15 years in the area of migration and health, maybe 12. Before that, I did work in another health area, and the reason I'm mentioning this is how I came to study migration and the impacts of migrant policies on health. Before moving to Chapel Hill, I was working in Mexico City, totally unrelated topics: reproductive health, access to reproductive health services for women and adolescents. I moved to Chapel Hill with that same job here because the organization that I was working in Mexico had the headquarters or the main office here in Chapel Hill. And as I migrated myself here, I started feeling some of the feelings that then later I explored through research, but I was feeling lonely and isolated and not connected to the community. My job required a lot of international travel, so I was always moving around. And suddenly I said, well, look, I need to have an anchor in my community. So I started volunteering for some Latino serving communities or Latino-based communities here in the Triangle. And by doing that work, I started just like getting more attuned to the challenges of migrants here. And that's when I did like a 180 shift in my career, because I was going I wanted to keep doing international work in that sense of global work and reproductive health. But then I was like, you know what, I really like this work. It really close to my heart. I was experiencing it myself. And I remember in a meeting, I was like, well, can you tell me what is your main public or your main health concern? I remember asking to the community members that were in that meeting, and it's like, my main health concern is my immigration status. So that really didn't make sense in public health terms. I was like, wait, what? And so that's how all this journey to explore the impacts of immigration policies or migration policies in health started. By that, like, my main health concern is my immigration status. So I decided to leave the organization I was working at, apply for the public health degree at Gillings, and that's how I'm here 16 years later. All right, so this is quickly my outline. It's gonna be hard to follow Anna's presentation, but I will try. But I will explore a little bit what are some migrant categories or groupings, because these categories are very important, particularly when we explore issues related to legality or legal frameworks, or how migrants are recognized in terms of their documentation status in a country. Then explore a little bit the migration process, and be ready here because this is the interactive moment of the presentation. I'm gonna prompt you a few questions. Then just very briefly, what is the level of migration within the Americas and the exchanges that we have, or the connections we have between Canada and the United States to Latin America, and Latin America within itself, because there is also migration within Latin America and the Caribbean. And lastly, I'm just going to present some small quotes, or some short quotes from the work I've done with migrants that are undocumented, Mexican migrants that are undocumented, or that have lived undocumented in the United States. All right, so who is a migrant? The International Organization of Migration defines a migrant as any person who has moved across an international border or within the state that they were born, or the place that they were born, or they're away from their habitual place of residency, regardless of the person's legal status, whether the movement is voluntary or involuntary, what the causes of the movement are, and what the length of stay is. So by this definition, who of you will consider yourselves a migrant? Have you moved from the place where you were born? Yeah. So in many ways, we are all migrants. We have all experienced this process of moving from one place to the other, right? And here in the United States, it's really common that people move around a lot. I mean, that was some of the things that I found very different from Mexico. In Mexico, apart from the heavy migration to the United States, or those traditionally migrant-sending communities in Mexico, people really don't move a lot. Like, my friends from high school are still living in the same neighborhoods, almost the same, most of them actually in the same house compounding since they've been living when they were kids. I'm sort of like the extraordinary person there in my close group of people, right? But here people move a lot, so for work, for studies, for family reasons, etc. But within that, there are some differences, right? We have economic reasons for migration, but we also have, and it's very common in the right now in the news, like the refugees or the people that are seeking asylum, that move because of political reasons. And then there is this discussion what we can consider migration that is forced, or migration that is voluntary, because people that don't have enough resources in their community to survive or to have a living decide to move to another place, either within the country of origin or across borders. Is that a forced migration, or is that voluntary migration? We can argue either way, right? Just quickly, under the United States law, this is the definition of a refugee person, and somebody that is located outside the United States of special humanitarian concern to the United States, demonstrate that they were persecuted or fear persecution due to these reasons: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. has not resettled in another country, this is important, and is admissible to the United States based on a series of reasons. And these definitions matter because they have implications for the regularization of the status of a person and the benefits that they can access once they are recognized in a country. So as I will talk later on, I am studying, or I'm interested in studying the health impacts of people that are not documented, which are people that do not qualify for this definition of refugee or for any other categories that the United States has as considered like documented status. A side note is like coming here undocumented is not a felony, it's a civil violation. So when we use the term illegal, it's one, not accurate, but also offensive, because no human can be illegal if you think about it. I mean, actions are illegal, or things are illegal, but not people. And again, within the immigration law, although some politicians have tried to make undocumented migration illegal and a felony, it is not. Undocumented migration is not a felony, it's a civil violation. All right, so this data is it's from 2018, but I haven't found a nice graph like this that shows the distribution or the division of who are considered international migrants. The numbers that I checked last night were around 280 million international migrants. This data is from 2018. And within that, we have some divisions, like how many are women, how many are children, how many are considered refugees within that definition. That definition that the United States has reflects the definition that the international community agrees on based on the International Treaty for Refugees. Then we have 4.5 million international students around the globe. A few thousand actually here in Chapel Hill. I was an international student. And then within that, international migrants, 150 million are considered migrant workers. And I'm gonna show you some definition of what is a migrant worker. As I was mentioning, the total number of international migrants has been growing, although the percentage or the relationship to the total population has stayed more or less stable in the last 20, 30 years. It has gone from 2.8% of the population, of the global population, to 3.5%, but you can see from 2005 has been steady. This is the distribution between men and women. You see the bar in the middle because it's the economic active people, right? But there are still older adults that are migrating and children that are migrating, probably with their parents or their caregivers here. I'm gonna show some regions that have some difference between the men and women, and I'll explain quickly why is that. Yeah, this is the slide. So within the categories of migrants, we have the migrant worker. The definition of a migrant worker by the Convention of the Rights of Migrant Workers. It's a person who is to be engaged or is engaged or has been engaged in a remunerated activity in a state of which they're not nationals. We see how many million migrant workers are according to the different regions in the world. And I want to point to the Arab states that you see that most of the migrants are men. And this is because there is a lot of jobs that require traditionally gendered roles like construction. So there's a lot of construction, and that's why there are a lot of migrant men there. Whereas if you see northern, southern, and Western Europe, you see more women, and because women here take care a lot of care. When Anna was talking about like care practices, women not only care for themselves and their families, they care for the communities, and in this case, we're talking about transnational chains of care that actually move and care for the elderly in other countries, or the children of others in other countries. And this is a big pattern that we see in Europe as well. Here's where we are. The United States is 50-50. This has to do both with the jobs available for migrants in services, in construction, in agriculture, but also because of the difficulties of going back and forth, because of the more regulations at the border. Families have decided to migrate as a unit instead of just the men migrating by themselves, which was the traditional way of migration for most of the 20th century. So this is how the other categories, those irregular migrants or undocumented migrants, it's a migrant that doesn't have the proper documentations to live or work or both or study in the place where they are. And there are ways in which they can become irregular. And in the international or at the global level, this is the preferred term, irregular migrants. In the United States, we use more undocumented, and we use also more derogatory terms like illegal, right? But I will encourage you not to use that word if something stays with you from this talk. Like, so how can a person become irregular? One way is that because they have an irregular entry, and this is the traditional crossing the border without documents, right? And we have endless stories out there in the popular media and the news, etc. But also, I mean, there's a lot of work done by many scholars about that. Like people crossing the border, we see a lot of that in the southern border of the United States. I was thinking the northern border of Mexico. In my head, I'm in Mexico all the time. I'm still in Mexico. In the northern border of Mexico, that's a huge corridor of migration, but we see it in other places as well, particularly in places where big economies migrate with lower economies, like the borders of the European Union, and you see irregular migration of people from East Europe migrating to Europe. The other is that somebody comes with a document. It could be a tourist visa, a work visa, a student visa, and that visa expires, and there hasn't been the person hasn't engaged in the process of regularizing the visa, or there is no pathway to do it because they don't have a job or they don't have a way to have their visa extended. Another way is because they come, for example, as a tourist with a tourist visa, but they engage in employment, in paid employment, and that is a violation of the tourist visa. So that immediately makes them irregular because they have violated the terms of their visa. So I can tell you, for example, from my experience as an international student, I had my student visa. It's called an F1. I was only allowed to work 20 hours a week. I couldn't work more. And I was able to work 40 hours a week during the summer semesters. So I had to be very careful of how many hours I work or that I have employment. I usually have like what is called half TA-ships or half RA-ships, half TA teaching assistantships, so that I would not pass those 20 hours and will be in violation of my visa. Now, as a faculty, what I'm facing as the students are working actually full-time is trying to get a full-time degree as well. And I'm like, how are you doing this? But that's not possible for many international students. The pay rate is still low, and making a living is very hard for international students right now because they just don't have enough income because of these limitations of how many hours they can actually work. But this is another way that I could have, for example, been outside of the parameters of my visa. Now, migrants can go in and out of irregularity depending on how laws and policies change, et cetera, et cetera. For example, I was just commenting with Anna that when I was in my last year of my PhD student, I got pregnant. I was pregnant with my son, and that's when the Trump administration had issued all these bans for even permanent residents. And we got an email from the International Students and Scholars Office at UNC saying, like, we suggest you all get a lawyer because we don't know what's going to happen. And I was about to go back to Mexico for a family reunion that was very important for me. And I was so scared because I was like, wait, can I go? Will I be able to return? I'm pregnant. I mean, there was another level of stress right there, right? And I did get a lawyer. I had to have a letter from the lawyer saying that I was traveling, that I was with regular status, that I had never violated my other visa statuses, et cetera, et cetera. So as you can see, it's very easy to go in and out of regular status depending on how policies of migration change. All right, now the other category is what I mentioned, the refugees. According to the International Refugee Council, a refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence. And this is important because this definition of refugee, for example, doesn't include economic migrants or displaced people by environmental or natural disasters, which I'm going to show in a second are now one of the top reasons why people are actually being displaced from their homes. An internally displaced person is person or group of persons who have been forced or obliged to flee or leave their homes or places of habitual residence, who have not crossed an international recognized border, such as the case of the community that Anna was presented. That's a clear example of who is an internally displaced people. We're seeing in the news the displacement of Ukrainians because of the conflict in Ukraine, internal displacement. We saw a huge migration of Syrians outside of Syria, but also a huge displacement within Syria. And we're seeing the same right now in Gaza. So all those people are part of the displaced people worldwide. This is a very nice map. It's very busy, but what I want to draw your attention is on the colors. Because the orange color represent the displacements because of conflict, and the blue colors represent the displacements because of natural disasters. And in 2022, there was more displacement because of natural disasters than because of conflict. That doesn't mean that conflict has slowed down. It means that global warming is creating a lot of challenges for natural disasters. And we can see that is happening in the United States, and you probably know some of the reasons why people are being displaced. The level and the force of hurricanes, the wildfires, earthquakes, and other natural disasters. So this is going to create, or is creating, a big challenge for nations within their national borders, but also outside, because a lot of displaced people internally tend to then become international migrants that seek better places to live somewhere else. Is the amount of people, the size of the people that have been displaced. Yeah. So we have, see the bubble in the United States is quite large. Here in Brazil, yeah. Is the size in the population, because it's in the numbers, millions. Yeah. Yeah, I can tell it's here. If the small is 15,000 or less, and the big bubble is more than 5 million. And last, no, not last, I have two more groups. There's another group that are people without a state or a nationality, the stateless population. And these are individuals that are not recognized as national by any state. The estimations are not accurate or precise, I would say. It's not that precise. There are between 4 and 10 million people that are not members of any states. And this can happen because, for example, after a war, a country is divided or dissolved, but there's people that caught in the middle of that political conflict, and they are not recognized by neither of the new states that are created after a conflict. And that's how people become stateless. A case in Latin America is the case of Haitians in the Dominican Republic. They are not recognized as Haitians anymore because they are the offsprings of Haitians in the Dominican Republic, but the Dominican Republic changed a regulation in the last few years saying that were not recognizing any Haitians, neither they descend as nationals of the Dominican Republic. So we have a group in Haiti, in the Dominican Republic of Haitian heritage that are stateless. The UN is trying to address this, is trying to push for the recognition of these people. Sometimes they participate, for example, in the Olympic Games or etc. with the Olympic flag. I don't know if you've seen that, because they don't have a state. They don't represent a state, right? And then the last is that there's a lot of human trafficking. This is what is considered the modern slavery. It could be human trafficking because of forced labor or forced marriage. There's a lot of human trafficking across borders, not just within borders. And unfortunately, in the whole of the Americas is not looking great. There is a lot of trafficking, in particular women trafficking and forced sex work. And that is actually happening in North Carolina. And the last is the Missing Migrants Project. It's all those migrants that have died or lost their lives through the process of migration, that they never made it to where they were going. We don't have exact numbers as well. I mean, the main area where data has been collected is the Mediterranean. It's a more confined space. It's usually attached to drowning in the sea, and they are able to collect the boats and the bodies. The other corridor is the United States and Mexico desert. What they have found, though, is that the bodies decompose very quickly in the desert, so that they are not able to find actually the remnants. They thought like the process will take maybe a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and actually happens in like 2-3 days. So something that is very dramatic. Yeah, this touches my heart a little bit, but like people that are migrating are taking objects with them. So if they lose their life, they can actually identify the object, because most of the time the bodies are not able to be recovered. And that's what is called oral forensics, trying to identify a person that has died through the objects. And migrants then are carrying very precious objects, personal objects with them, so that they're able to be identified in case they lose their lives. All right, so maybe these discussions I can leave them for later, but I wanted just to ask these questions for reflection. Why are these categorizations or categories of migrants populations important, and in which ways these definitions can help deconstruct harmful narratives about migrant communities, right? Because we have a mainstream narrative about what are migrants, right? Or harmful narratives of migrants, like they're coming to steal jobs, they're coming to increase costs on the social services, they are criminals, etc., etc. But we can see how understanding the ways in which people become migrants and how they have different documentation status can help deconstruct these narratives. All right, this is where the interactive moment comes with you all. This is the traditional migration process. When we study migration, we try to see all these points. We see the origin, meaning the place where they're coming from, where they grew up, what their communities look like. Then the place of transit, are they staying somewhere in between before they arrive to the place of destination? We're seeing a lot of people staying in this transit space, particularly, for example, now with the new policies for refugees for the United States, that they have to stay in Mexico or in a third country. In this case, is the northern part of Mexico. They're staying there for months or years. We also know that many refugee camps in other regions of the world, migrants, refugees, or people that are seeking asylum are staying there for years before they are actually being able to arrive to a place of destination. Then we have the destination place, where are they finally arriving, where they live their lives, they work, they maybe form a family, they have their kids, etc. And then we have the return to the origin, or to another destination. And this is important because, for example, the way in which North Carolina's migrant population, Latino population grew was because of the other destination, as traditional areas where Latino migrants have been going and living for a long time, like California, Illinois, New York, become crowded and more expensive, etc. New areas of migration started developing, and that's the case of the south of the United States. And North Carolina went from having 1% of Latinos in 1990 to almost 11% now. That's a huge increase in the percentage of our population. So this is, sometimes the migration process doesn't end at here, right? It keeps going. And maybe it changes through the second and third generations as well. All right, so what do you think pushes? When we talk about migration, we talk about push and pull factors. Push is like things that make you leave your country or your place of origin, and pull is things that make you go to a specific place. What are push and pull factors of this migration? Yeah. Give me a second, I need to hand you a mic. Sorry, because we have people online.
Hello. All right. So I was saying, like, you know, for my student population, I'm a teacher, and like, so like a lot of ours are refugees from Burma, where there's a lot of ethnic conflict. And I was saying, like, for my family, like it was like 100 years ago, but like my family came from Mexico during the revolution because of the instability and the violence. So yeah, a lot of it is just basically trying to find a safer place to live so that kids can go to school, because if there's wartime, you know, stuff like school's not an option for them.
Yeah. And what is a pull factor? If we can give the mic for the people from Burma to come here, we have a huge population here in Orange County.
Yeah, I mean, because so like I'm teaching here, and like before I was doing my my degree, and I was doing an internship in Greensboro, and over there's a large Sudanese population, and so like I think like a lot of the pull to specific places are just like where like refugee communities happen to settle. They usually kind of settle together in their own community, so they can be around people that share their culture and their language and stuff like that, and that there's community resources available. So, you know, especially, I mean, in the Triangle, there's like supposedly about 9,000 Karen refugees here. And so a lot of the Karen people will come to the Triangle because there's so many other people around, and, you know, there's good schools and stuff. And, you know, a lot of the parents haven't been to school or weren't able to send their kids to school back home. So, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a pull factor, right? There's a resettlement infrastructure here in North Carolina, or in the Triangle, for this population. A couple more other of like push and pull factors. We heard conflict, we heard infrastructure for resettlement, others that you can think of.
When the climate makes it impossible to earn a living in a particular community, people tend to move away.
Yeah. Yes. I'm currently doing an oral history project with migrant farm workers here in North Carolina, and one of the migrant farm workers I was doing the oral history with, he was saying that he stopped working his land in Mexico because it stopped raining. And it hasn't rained in the last, I don't know, 10 years. So that they could not, and he had already done more internal migration. He had moved from farming to construction within Mexico, and then finally decided to come as a temporary visa holder, farm worker in North Carolina. So the pull factor for him to North Carolina was that there's this temporary visa process, and there is a lot of demand of farm workers here in North Carolina. So that's how he was able to come. So here are just some list of push and pull factors, right? Poverty, violence, lack of opportunities, environmental issues, political unrest, war, problems with family, migration tradition, because this is another one. When I've done work in Mexico, it's like when you grow up, what do you want to do? You ask adolescents or children, like, oh, I'm going to migrate. Like, there's no question about it. Like, it's been a tradition for the last 3-4 generations, right? Then in the pull factors, economic opportunities, supportive social networks, host community open to receive others. This is a very welcoming area, for example, Orange County particularly. Host communities are open to receive others. Social opportunities, housing, schools, a safe environment, family reunification, and this migration pathway established. I don't know if you know, but Carborough is a sister city with Juventino Rosas in Guanajuato in Mexico. So they call Juven Carborough, they call it Carborough Juven Carborough because a lot of people from Juventino Rosas in Guanajuato, which is in the center of Mexico, has migrated to Carborough. So they are officially sister cities. And there are a few of them in the United States, these sister cities through the migration pathway. Then, what makes people move again? What do you think people relocate to other places or go back to their countries of origin? What are those push factors again? What's your name? Alex.
Yeah.
Well, I was saying like one student I have is from Honduras. Like he always says like he's about to graduate and he's like, oh, I want to go back to Honduras. And I think a lot of it is just because he misses it. Like that's his home. That's where he grew up. And I mean that a big part of it is just like he's here and I think he likes it here well enough, but that's still home for him no matter what the problems are or anything like that. And so there could be family, there could be that culture that they're really missing that they're not getting here.
Here. Over here.
I have a daughter-in-law who talks about returning to her home country in Central Asia because of the political situation here.
Right.
Political situation here. Yes.
Yes. So, well, there are many reasons why people decide to then either move to other places or return to their countries of origin, right? Like, I mean, there's a voluntary repatriation, meaning I'm going back to my country. I'm done with the experience of migration. Again, family reunification, either with the generation above or with children that were left behind and they migrated by themselves. Deportation is a huge one, and it's an issue that it's facilitated by all these policies that are trying to control immigration, particularly undocumented immigration in the United States. Illness, at some point in some conversations I've had with the Consulate of Mexico here in Raleigh, they were telling me that they were helping to repatriate a lot of people that have cancer, for example, that they could not afford treatment here. So they decide to go back to Mexico to get treatment there. Aging, again, as people age out, you can imagine that these people engage in work that is not a formal job, so they don't have a pension, they don't have a retirement plan, they don't have any social safety net to age in place, so they decide to go back to their countries of origin. I'm going to speak a little bit of how that is part of their resilience and their coping. Through the process of being here and working, they also invest in property back in their countries of origin, so they have a place to go eventually. Economic crisis, we saw an enormous people that decide to return to Mexico. For example, in the 2008 economic crisis, they were here, they were not able to find jobs. Regulations or limitations on how they could get hired got more stringent. For example, the E-Verify, I don't know if you know what is E-Verify. So a company that has more than 10 employees has to verify that the documentation status, the social security number of the person. So that limits the places where people that are undocumented can work. In 2006, North Carolina stopped issuing driver's licenses to anybody that was undocumented. So, and the last licenses maybe expire around 2009. So imagine you not having a driver's license. What do you use your driver's license for? Pretty much everything, right? For traveling in airplanes, for getting your prescriptions filled, for getting your healthcare services, for identifying yourself in any public institution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a way of controlling people, right? Like, so we're not issuing an identification to you so that we prevent you from or make your life more difficult. So that was all happening around 2008, including the economic crisis. So many people decided to return to Mexico. It's like, well, there's no life here. And then the daily barriers, right? Like what I just explained. It's important to recognize this because we think also that migrants don't have networks or resources that they can tap onto, like they're disempowered completely. And that's not necessarily the case. I mean, there's a strong network, there's a strong transnational network. They can decide, and they decide for themselves. This is it, I'm gonna go back to my country, nothing is gonna happen. So that we also don't have this paternalistic approach to when we think about migrants and the issues that they face. All right, and then what I was explaining about the places of transit. More and more people are staying in this place and this space, both asylum seekers, but also people that are trying to cross undocumented, because they cross the border, they are deported, but they stay at the border, they don't go to their hometowns. I mean, the trip from a town in the south of Mexico is too long to the northern part of Mexico. So they decide to stay at the north part. Maybe they have some piecemeal jobs or day jobs, and then they stay there to try to cross again. So they are in this in-between space. That can be very stressful and not very conducive to health. We're having a lot of health issues there in those informal settlements. All right, so just quick numbers. You see that the majority of Latin Americans are migrating to Northern America. I mean, Latin Americans and Caribbeans are coming to the United States. We see it reflected here. But we see a good proportion of migrants or people moving within the region of Latin America, meaning that there are also good corridors already established, like Venezuelans, for example. Venezuelans are resettling in Colombia, in Mexico, in Argentina, etc. Argentinians during the big crisis in the early 2000s moved a lot in great numbers to other countries in Latin America, including Mexico, for example. But Latin Americans also migrate to other places, Europe and Asia, although in smaller numbers. So this is a very well-established corridor. Of course, there is an economic incentive for this migration, right? We can see here how the gross domestic product of some countries, like almost 40% is the remittances from migrants in other places. So the economy of these countries basically depends on migration. Mexico, no, this is the outflows. Mexico is not, it's here. It looks like small, but it's huge in terms of the amount of money. It was like, I checked yesterday, it was like $54 billion in remittances. I mean, it's the equivalent of what Mexico generates in the primary sector, like agriculture and industrial production. So the equivalence of how much migrants from Mexico are sending back to Mexico is the equivalent of what Mexicans are producing in Mexico in a primary sector, in the primary area of production. So of course, again, this is a very economic incentive. But also we see that the monies are coming from Latin America as well to other countries. This is the other thing I wanted to show you, because this emphasizes the previous slide about the displacements because of natural disaster. How, apart from Colombia and El Salvador, that a lot of the displacement is happening because of conflict, all the other countries, their displacement is happening because of natural disasters. So if you see the countries in Central America, they're very small. So I keep wondering how long more those countries can be resilient to these massive, for example, hurricanes on a regular basis. Because if every other year or every third year or every fourth year, a hurricane of huge magnitude comes and destroys the infrastructure, how much can they keep recovering from those events? I've done work here in East North Carolina, and a hurricane recovery can take 5 to 10 years. So if this is happening with more frequency, it's very hard to recover from those events. Now this is North America. This is the migrants to North America. And we see, well, no surprise here that the big chunk is coming from Latin America, right? This represents all the Latin Americans in North America. North America including both the US and Canada. But we have in the United States a big group also of Europeans, Asians, and Africans, right? So it's a place where a lot of migrants come. And the last is that we don't have conflicts in the United States, but we have a lot of displacement in millions. Maybe in percentage of the population it looks small still, but in millions there's close to 2 million people that have been displaced because of natural disaster. And that is a huge number. It's 20% of the population of North Carolina, if you put it in numbers. All right, so all the way to here was more like this quick introduction about the categories of migrants, the numbers of migrants, the reasons people migrate, etc. So I'm now going to try to dive quickly into the health and the well-being of migrants. This is just a quick definition of what is health by the World Health Organization. Health is defined as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And this includes mental health. So this is very important because we're not talking just about the absence of disease, but actually if you're ill, that you are actually having a good quality of life. And in general, that your social and physical and mental well-being is there and is guaranteed. As I mentioned, I came to this work because I've heard that over and over, like, my main concern is my immigration status, or my immigration status is what's causing a lot of my stress, or if I had documents, I could be doing this and that, or if I had documents, I wouldn't have gotten this disease, or et cetera, et cetera. As we see here, I have again like the cycle of migration. These are the different things that people can experience during the process of migration that can lead them to illness and disease. For example, we see like examples of or experiences of trauma and violence, like some of what Anna was mentioning before, or during the travel. Again, there's a lot of issues when people are traveling, trying to get to the place of community, how those experiences then affect the individuals when they are here. Maybe the structural violence has stopped in the way that they were experiencing it. But for example, I have people that I have interviewed saying like, well, every time I feel fear because of I see a police car and I don't have documents, I feel the same feelings I felt when I was attacked or I experienced this physical violence in my country of origin. So it's not that the act is the same, it's that the feeling is the same. And that's the definition of trauma, and I'm gonna get to that in a second. So that translates into specific illnesses and diseases. Mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, PTSD that can happen because of the experiences in the countries of origin. Those get exacerbated during the travel, and in the arrival, what we're seeing, for example, is psychosis. Like by the time there is an accumulation of experiences that have put the body and the person through extreme stress. We see a lot of psychosis both in migrants in the host communities and in the return communities. There is a breaking point, like we are resilient up to a point. If we keep experiencing experiences of stress, discrimination, etc., we can see those diseases. Other things that I've seen, and I'm seeing it both when I've done transnational research, and I'm seeing it now with farm workers, for example, they work in very heavily heavy bodily engaged work, like physical work, like farm work and construction, under the sun. Heat exposure is an issue. it started developing in like headaches, nausea, dizziness, etc. And then you see it back in their countries of origin with acute kidney disease and dialysis, because that is the process how the disease develops. So you have a lot of then later disability later in life. I interviewed many or a few men back in Mexico that couldn't work anymore in the United States because of chronic pain or chronic diseases, and they decided to stop working and go back home. So what about North Carolina? As I mentioned, we have, well, this is the foreign-born immigrants in North Carolina, the number by 2020, and that includes all of the groups. It's not just Latinos, because as Alex mentioned, we have other groups living in North Carolina, and these are the sectors of the industries where they work, mostly in construction, agriculture, administrative support, waste and management, accommodation, food services, and manufacturing. So they are also a big part of the workforce in the state. And this is recent, the most recent data. But I'm going to show you an example of how a traditional Latino family looks now in North Carolina, because we think that all the Latinos in North Carolina are foreign born, but they aren't. We are seeing this demographic transition. So when you saw here in 2001, most of the Latinos were foreign born, but here the trend crossed, right? So now half of them are foreign born, and then we have the US born Latinos. And now we're seeing the third generation, the children of those. Usually the foreign born have the parents and a child that was foreign born, and this is what we call the 1.5 generation. Those children that came with their migrant parents, they are also undocumented, but they qualify for like DACA, for example, the deferred action, yes, thank you. And then we have the US-born children. So this is what we call a mixed status family, right? A family living in the same household that has mixed documentation status. Some are undocumented, some have this DACA, no? Like this temporary or some sort of relief documentation, but it's not full documentation status. It allows people to work. And then we have the fully citizens. And then we have now the third generation. So this is an example of a typical Latinx family in North Carolina right now. We're seeing that transition. So as I mentioned, I think, well, and the reason I'm saying is 10 years ago when I was going through my public health training, I was saying, well, migration is related to health. And they were like, well, yeah, but not necessarily. I mean, you know, traditional public health is like, well, these pathogens leads to this disease, or this health behavior leads to this outcome, right? You exercise, you're healthy. You eat well, you're healthy. I'm like, no, there's some microstructures that relate to health. And that's why I was interested in studying the impact of documentation status. Because people that are undocumented are left without the protection of their rights. I have searched the literature, and this is what I've found, like what were the impacts of the being undocumented and mental health, but it wasn't as clear as this. But I was drawn by these two terms that I found, the legal syndrome or the legal status stress, that some European scholars started to talk about 10 years ago. Because they were saying, like, people are coming with a constellation of symptoms that are non-specific. Their labs are okay. They don't have any illness, but they are suffering. And what is driving this suffering, right? And so that's what led me to conduct this study, which was an ethnographic study, both in North Carolina and in Guanajuato and Hidalgo in Mexico. Hidalgo is the second state. Guanajuato is the state that sends more migrants to North Carolina, and Hidalgo is the second one. And it's more recent migration from Hidalgo. So I went into both places. I talked to people that had migrated to North Carolina and that had decided to return. And I talked to people that were living in North Carolina undocumented. And I focus on men for many other reasons. I used to work with women as Anna, but in one of the studies I was doing, the women said, like, it's very hard to engage men. Men are not participating in health-related activities. They don't want to come to the community health events. They don't want to engage in voluntary work. And when I was doing that research and asking them, why don't you want to participate? It's like, I don't have time, and I already contribute to the community. We build the roads, we clean the gardens, we paint the houses, we build the buildings. We're already there. What else do we need to do? And well, that was very striking to me, right? And I walk every day now from the parking lot to my office, the new surgery tower. I've been like, I really want to do this. I don't think I will be able to make it, but all the or 80% or 90% of the construction workers are Latinos, right? And I always think about this person that told me that. We already do everything in the community. What else do we need to do for the community? Another project I did, a photo voice project. The man, a construction worker, day laborer, took a photo of the building, one of the nice buildings on Franklin Street, and said, look, I participated in construction of this building. It's very nice. It's 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom, whatever. I will never be invited to a gathering in that building, right? So that tells you how there are constant presence and a very important presence in our community, but also not recognized presence. So I won't share all the results of that study with you, but I just want to share a few quotes that speak to this living undocumented. When we think about how being undocumented brings a lot of recurring thoughts and worries, negative feelings and stress, and that has actually have some psychosomatic symptoms, like what I was saying, like these constellations of symptoms that are not specific, like headaches, insomnia. A person told me that I have facial paralysis, and I think it was because I was worried about my documentation status, right? I spoke also as part of this study with mental health providers that provide care for migrants. And they both talk about suicide ideation and substance use as a way that is also all this stress is manifesting. So this is a quote from one of the people I interview, or the men I interview. And this speaks to their experience of mental health issues. You get that depression sitting here, sitting the same. You see the same, you see the couch, your TV every day, the weekends you feel trapped. For me, depression is when you feel hopeless, like you get hopeless because you want to go out somewhere with your kids and you cannot. And then you think, what did I come here to do? And this is because they felt, or they are limited in the spaces, the geographical spaces in which they can move because of their lack of driver's license. They don't want to drive too far, and they only want to drive to necessary places like the supermarket, the doctor, and work, so that they decrease the risk of being detained and deported. It's also manifested in some physical ailments. People talk about injuries or accidents, asthma, diabetes, and hypertension as chronic conditions that they are living. I saw it back in Mexico with the men I interviewed in Mexico, disability, and their natural aging process, but they aged quicker. I mean, you see a person and you think this person might be 70, 80, and they're like 55, you know? So it's like the strain in the body of the process of migration. And this is a quote from somebody I interviewed in Mexico. What affected my health were the sleepless nights, when I will go there to the other side walking. That used to affect me a lot because there were nights where we did not sleep, we did not eat well. In those times you were not affected because one was younger, but now at this age it is showing. It is what results with time, all the difficult times, the sleepless nights. When one is young, you don't feel it. And I just put this photo. This is a photo of a saint. They pray when a family member is starting the trip to the United States, undocumented, with a coyote or a smuggler. This is the saint they pray to, and there is a prayer on the back of it, asking for making sure that their family member arrives well to where they need to go. And this is another quote from a sister of a man I interview. These names are all not real, are pseudonyms, by the way, just to protect their confidentiality. But she's speaking about what she sees in her brother. No? I see him as being very irritable, and he's gaining a lot of weight quickly. He feels stuck. He cannot even have a driver's license to pick up his son. You're always cracking your knuckles. You cannot get ahead. You survive, but you do not move forward. And Jaime does not know how to ask for help or say, hey, I feel bad. I need to talk to someone. As her voice breaks, she says, I have seen him as looking bad lately. He looks sick. He always says that everything hurts, and you cannot really get close to him. So while women are able to talk, come in circles, share, express their feelings in other ways, men have less avenues, and maybe that's something we can discuss later. Now, as I was saying, I came to trauma work later, not while doing this work, but as I am understanding trauma better, trauma is defined as that challenging emotional consequences that is living through a distressing event can have for an individual. And we can identify as these distressing events, of course, what we know, like wars, natural disasters, violence, but it can be also something less traumatic that still causes a lot of trauma. Trauma scholars emphasize the emotional injury as the one that is important to address, because it's not what happened, what the event was, but it's how it made you feel, right? And here's the quote of that I consider some of expression of this constant trauma, right? For me, it's thinking about, for example, in my case, that I crossed as an illegal person. I think about that all the time. That is because since I am illegal, this can happen to me, or I cannot do these things. So I constantly think about that. So for me, it is not something physical, but it's what most, there are times that this affects me the most, that by not being well focused, things can happen that won't like to occur. He mentioned twice, this is a person that had an accident at work. He said he was distracting and hit himself, and so he had broken his leg with one heavy machinery in construction. But also one time he fell asleep because he said he had been very stressed about something that was happening, and while driving he fell asleep and went off the road. But he said that he thinks it was because he's constantly worried about being undocumented. And then there is another quote here. When you get re-traumatized, right? When you think about the issue. I try to forget to focus on other things. I try not to think about it. Although I cannot do it, it is not going away. It remains there, but at least it has not bothered me all the time. It will bother me when the topic comes up, but not all the time. I just try to forget. So forget or not think about it is a way to cope with the reality of being undocumented. By the way, for this person, he's now documented, and I was able to serve as an expert witness for his case to get his green card. So in which ways I saw some resilience, for example, some sort of resilience is in their pride as hard workers. I am an immigrant. I'm neither more or less than anybody else. One must feel proud of who one is. I now freely tell people I am undocumented. I am not ashamed. On the contrary, I'm proud that I have accomplished more than other people do that have papers. So I saw some sparks of resilience there, although this was not the common thing. And this is a quote from the mental health provider I interviewed, which is trying to bring a sense of control despite the uncertainty of being undocumented during the therapeutic encounter. Part of the work in therapy is creating a sense of safety again. I actually see there's no ideal way to cope with the fear of deportation. Most parents that I've talked to have said that having a plan has actually been really helpful. That way you don't feel maybe completely out of control. It is hard for me to talk about this topic of deportation with clients who have already been through so much, but I know that it's constantly in their minds. And so I think it's important to bring it up and check in with people about how they're doing. So this is very important. And during political moments where immigration is in the forefront of the political debate, people start feeling that they need to do something about their situation. For example, having letters of attorneys in case they're separated, making sure that the kids, although they are U.S. citizens, also have the nationality of their countries they're from, so that they can take their kids with them or claim them if they are deported. Because we've seen cases of families separated and the children taken by the U.S. social services because they're U.S. citizens, and the countries of origin cannot claim them because they don't have the nationalities of their parents. So I think I went over my time, but just the situation is very complex, and Mexican men that live undocumented struggle every day to be recognized as members of the communities that they have worked and lived many years. There is a lot of forms of suffering, or what many scholars call social suffering, and they experience this in different ways. So these constant experiences of stress and everyday challenges require the attention of everybody so that we can do something about it. Okay, I'm done. Sorry, I couldn't too long.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's very helpful. And we have just a few minutes for a few questions. So I want to start. I have one here and one there. Start here.
I found it very interesting that the one person you interviewed who seemed most hopeful was the one who had no children, and the ones who seemed most depressed were the ones who had 3, 4, 5 children. So, or more, right? So can you comment on the fact that, you know, you look at that versus the responsibility that individual has for a whole lot of other
Family.
people?
Yeah, totally. No, that's a great observation, because I didn't mention. Yeah, I mean, the fact that you are the breadwinner of the family, you're responsible for 3, 4, 5, 6 family members, your partner, etc., is huge, right? And there's a huge motivation of them trying to not get caught and be deported, because they wouldn't be able to sustain a family of 4 with an income from Mexico and sending the remittances back, right? So it's a real stress.
So do the ones that are in the United States that have large family members versus the ones who are by themselves in the United States?
Wait,
with families in Mexico? I'm sorry. So do the men, let's say, who have their family with them in the United States, are they more stressed than the ones who have their family, the rest of the family still in Mexico and are sending remittances back? Is there a difference between those two?
I don't know if there's more or less stress than, I mean, I'm public health at the end, so I don't have the data to make that affirmation. But my guess is that the sources of the stress are different and the worries are different. What I've heard is that from men that are by themselves here, it's like, well, I can leave anytime I want. My family is there. My family is safe. I don't have to worry about them. When they are here, it's like, I have all of them here. My kids, half of my kids are U.S. citizens. If we go back, we're gonna take away the opportunity to have an education here, etc. So there's other things that start worrying them. So yeah, so it's different.
So we have a question back here.
Yeah.
So Leonardo asked the question, what did I come here for? Does he have an answer, or does he just stay depressed, or will he stay here? Will he try to go back?
Which one, sorry?
Leonardo.
Leonardo had a quote, "Why did I come here?"
Yeah. No.
Is that what it was?
Right.
And so the question becomes, do people regret having immigrated?
Yes.
Does that message get back to other people who are wanting to come and say, wait,
Well, actually, yes, because
What?
Leonardo actually went back in 2008, 2009 because of the crisis I was mentioning, worked there for a few years, gathered money and say, we're going back. They came back as a family unit. He has a kid from another marriage or another partner in Mexico, and the kid comes, and the kid is like, this is horrible. Why did you bring me here? And the kid actually decided to go back. And then his brother and nephew were trying to get money to come here. And he's like, don't come. Put a business in Mexico. This is no life. Don't come here. So yeah, it is getting.
so
a
it
problem.
does, that word circulates
Yeah.
in the family. A question over here.
My question has to do, I think, with culture and work ethic. I'm older than I think everybody in here, at least I'm in the top 3 older persons. 4 job categories. Construction, landscape, and fast food and housekeeping. When I was a little boy, that was predominantly white, and then it got white and black, and then the blacks got less and the Latinos got more, so it ended up being the whites and the Latinos. And now the Latinos, a lot of like contractors, they'll own the company, but all their workers are Hispanic, restaurant owners, or not a high level restaurant, but lower. You know, the owner and maybe the manager, and then everybody else is Latino. What is in the culture and the work ethic of Latinos where they've displaced pretty much all the black people in a lot of jobs?
I wouldn't put it in terms of displacing other workers. I just think in numbers they have grown. I've seen a couple of things. They work very hard because they want to make money, and they want to make money quickly. Everybody comes with the idea that they are going to return back. So it's like, well, if I have 6 months or 2 years here, I'm just going to work, and I'm going to save all that money and go back. If that happens or not, that's a different story, but that's the initial drive of this intense level of working. But the second is, they are also afraid of being reported or losing their jobs because it's not as easy as it was, or at least that's what they told me. Like before 2010, the crisis, it was very easy to find jobs, and they were not requiring like the proof of citizenship or the social security number because E-Verify didn't exist, etc. Now they take care of their jobs very hard. Like if they have a job or an employment, they work hard, and they work hard to maintain it because it's not that easy to jump from one job to the other, or because of their documentation status. So that's what maybe makes them more hardworking than other workers. That other workers can get organized or can say like, I don't agree with the work conditions, or I don't agree with the salary, I'm just gonna leave. They don't have that negotiation power because they are undocumented.
So actually work is the safest place they can be, because if they're driving, they're out in the community, something can happen.
Right.
So work is safe in that sense.
I know there is a mental health clinic in the Triangle El Futuro that is focused on the Latin community. Is this a common approach, and is it effective in dealing with some of these problems you've described?
That's a great question. I mean, this is where I think more community-based type of interventions might be more effective in terms of reaching more numbers. What I know from El Futuro, I know them well, is that they are overwhelmed. They don't have the capacity to serve everybody in the community. They're constantly traging people that are coming for services there. The other question is like, is this traditional way in which we approach mental health, is it the best way? I don't know, particularly when we have great numbers. Like, is it this individual one-on-one therapy or medication approach to psychiatry the best approach, or there are like more building community strategies that can serve as these places for mental health healing, or healing and healing of trauma and sharing of their experiences or their thoughts or their feelings. I'm actually part of a group of Latino women in Scarborough that we embroidered together, and that has been a fantastic place for me, and I see it for the women as well. We don't talk about anything like political or serious or anything, but we're just there like trying to learn traditional ways of embroidery from Mexico, and it has just been a great space for us.
So we'll take one more question, and then we're going to just kind of transition into bringing Anna back in and have a panel.
If I could comment on that aspect of community building, American migrants who go to other countries form strong expat communities, and they're comfortable. They make strong bonds, and I think I could imagine the same thing happening for migrants who come to this country, finding great comfort and pleasure in that kind of community bonding.
Yeah, and there is a lot of that, but not for everybody. That's the difference, because it also depends on the location of the person, or the socioeconomic status, or how they come. Like, for example, I've worked a lot with single men, day laborers, and their experiences are quite different. I mean, their only network is other men. Their ways of engaging and building communities, for example, through maybe things that we consider not good or not appropriate, like substance use, for example. But that's what it's available to. So we should not blame them for that. It's the only thing available for them. Now that I'm working with farm workers in East North Carolina, there's no integration to the local community. They live far away in the rural areas, disconnected from everybody. They sometimes don't even know where they are physically, and they shuffle them around all the time so that they cannot get to know each other or get organized to contest the labor conditions, etc. So there's no building community in those instances. I mean, for me, that's closer to human trafficking, but that's a different discussion.
I want to stop here. We're going to continue with questions in the panel, but I want to bring Anna back up. We're going to take just a 2 minute break and move into more questions, comparing these two stories of community building and actually isolation as well. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Laura Villa-Torres, for an exceptionally well-informed study of migration. Thank you.